Well, how are we doing? How are we doing on this fine evening? This is Dr. Gregory Clarke Sr. And once again, I thank all the members of the Comeback Collective Circle, regardless if they're here or not, that we are going to flow. We are not going to belabor long. We are about to jump into part two as we continue to delve into the Index Universal Life Insurance. Now, last week, first I started off with a kind of a monologue, and I don't want to bore anyone with that, but that was more cathartic for me, and it was just a very interesting perspective that it was time for me to share that out of my space. Hopefully, it didn't come off as rambling, but if you see episode 39 on my respective YouTube channel at Dr. Gregory Clarke Master Coach, that was me really pouring out and recognizing how I had to become much more aligned with when it comes to money, when it comes to resources. We get this paper, we get this currency, and we don't necessarily are taught how to deal with it. I mean, we have people that we mimic, we have environments that we grow through, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily learning how to handle money. And one of the things that, as we're about to get into part two, the teaching, they started to, it's interesting that some of the individuals who have become very, very successful in life started at least at the age of 44. So it makes you wonder, is it because you now have the experience and the wisdom of all the stuff you did in your teenage years? Your 20s, you was just out there just running amok. And then in your 30s, you just starting to get it. But I noticed something. Even when I turned 40, there was like a switch. It was like certain things even that I did in my 30s was like, I'm not doing that anymore. It just didn't, now it's almost as if like you get to that space when you finally start to apply the information that you have with your experience, and now you have some wisdom. So that's just my thought. But as we get into this respective space, let me get this show on the road. Get this show on the roadie road. Yes, yes. And as always, I always ask Miss Nicole Johnson, our pseudo um, co-host, benchmark, sometimes individual who lets me know, if I'm going astray. Can she see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Amen, amen, amen. And I want to share it so everyone can hear me say thank you for your how shall I say, your feedback about the forthcoming book. It was helpful. It was helpful. Yes,
You are welcome.
thank you. And the reason why I'm saying it like that, because sometimes we can move in space. Yes, we're going to get into the teaching. We see the screen we see the teaching on the screen. But at times we can get in a space where we may feel that feedback, even if it's critical of something or something that needs to be, just a little bit more refined, that, we almost get in those spaces like, oh, am I overstepping a boundary? And you know what? In order to become as great as you so choose to be, if you're not willing to be refined, if you're not willing to go through the spaces of continuous development and recognizing that, you're not the end all be all, that it's good to get some checks and balances, then you'll never get anywhere in life. And so, just decided just to share that extra little nugget with some of y'all as we're getting to these key features of Index Universal Life Insurance and why it's so great, because last week we started to talk about this and we started to talk about, the different ways and different stuff. But now we're going to get into the key features. So if you missed last week, go catch up on my YouTube channel. Once again, it's episode 40. And it's part one of this particular discussion. Right now, we are in part two. So I'll probably piggyback on with Miss Johnson. I will read the four out of the four boxes. I'll read number 1 and 3, and I will ask you to read 2 and 4, and then I'll read the bottom. Okay. Key features of Index Universal Life Insurance. Remember, this is something that the wealthy utilize. And you hear people talk all the time that they have these type of policies. What they end up doing is they utilize it because of the benefits of this type of policy that they're willing to bar against it or utilize it for business expansion or it's not really something that you just do to pay bills. This is not that type of product. And that's why, as I stated last week, this is not one of those type of things where they're trying to keep it from you or it's hidden away. No, they recognize who this type of policy is for. Now, if you start making the moves and aspire and get to this aspirational level, then of course this will be one of the things that, regardless if it's your broker, if it's a brokerage house, regardless if it's different insurance companies that you may not necessarily see advertised on your television screen, and all of a sudden they deal with estate planning and things of that nature. You start having those relevant conversations as you get closer and closer to the apex of the mountain. You're down at the base. If you're down there where you're near the trees, yeah, you're going to get some information. But as you move up, you start to recognize that the information starts to become a little different. So without further ado, permanent coverage. That's one of the key features of index universal life insurance. Permanent coverage, lifelong coverage when premiums are kept up to date with flexible premium and death benefit options. Basically, what that is saying is that as long as you pay for this policy, you'll always have access to it, regardless if it's the death benefit, regardless if it's the cash value that you'll have access to if you feel that you need to tap into, or if you see your cash value is starting to become accentuated, that's more of a death benefit for those that's going to be left, when you transition. So never look at life insurance as something like, oh, someone's attempting to kill me off. No, it has nothing to do with that. It's part of a well-rounded wealth strategy. And for some of us who have some level of faith, and when we hear about leaving an inheritance for our children's children, this is one of the ways you do that. I know they was talking about the other day, and I know Ms. Johnson's going to talk about read slide box two. But they was talking about Quincy Jones. When Quincy Jones transitioned, everyone's saying, he's worth all these hundreds of millions of dollars. And yes, he was. But he had his estate set up. Everything was in particular trust. By the time he died and they started opening up, there was no probate, there was no arguing at no courthouse. The insurances that were there, and things were well positioned. The house was paid off and trust, and this is taken care of, and this, that, and the third. And all the different kids, had at least, somewhere near, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere about, I think it was 8 figures each. And everything set up. But part of it was that he had these type of policies, which people, as they move in certain areas of expansion, start to become abreast of. So, Ms. Johnson, what is the second box saying?
Cash value growth. Potential growth through an equity index account with option to allocate part to fixed interest.
Now, I'm going to ask her, since she read that, and I specifically desired for her to read that box, because knowing her, she's going to go to her assistant, which you should have assistants. You should be utilizing the technology around you and not just be waiting just to hear it, because that's what makes it a dialogue and not a monologue. That's why my teaching style, it's a little different. It's not really the pedagogy of oppression where I'm just talking at you and just expecting you just to, absorb. No, this, I also grow from the interaction. And I know Mr. Franklin is here, so we thank for his presence and all the other members of the company of prophets as they're trickling in, trickling in. So, Ms. Johnson, what do you see when your assistant is telling you about the cash value growth in relation to IULs? Now I'll play the Jeopardy music. You have anything, Ms. Johnson?
I do. IUL cash value grows tax
Mm.
deferred Ooh, that's important.
Mm.
Based
Uh-oh.
on the performance of a market index like the S&P 500, with
Mm-hmm.
gains up to a cap, often 9 to 12%, and a 0% floor to protect against losses.
Mm-hmm.
Historical data shows average credited returns around 7 to 10% annually, though net growth depends on fees, typically maxed out at 1.5% of the cash value.
Mm. So right there, they're letting you know, thank you for that. And right there, they're letting you know, it's almost, that's why most brokerage houses, when they start seeing that some of their, say their clients are starting to get in that space where, they got some coin, not just, okay, yeah, you just in the market, you may have six figures in it. That's good. No, no, when they start saying, oh, maybe you got seven figures in the market. Maybe you have eight figures in the market. Maybe you have nine figures in the market and you have other stuff that's going on. Okay, now they're going to start presenting these type of options because it's another way for you to have the protection of life insurance, but at the same time, you're not doing what like the regular whole life insurance is doing. And believe in me, as we're going through this teaching, we're not making regular whole life. Please, for the love of God, that's the main thing I was stressed from my perspective. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what Dr. Clarke is saying. Dr. Clarke will not tell anyone to get a term life insurance. If anything, if someone is in their 20s, I would tell them to find some whole life that will grow with them. If you find some whole life in your 20s, you'll be surprised. I mean, you may not be at the space yet where you can get to an IUL, but if you're in your 20s, please look for a whole life insurance policy. That's just my opinion. And the reason for that is if you're worth the investment and you're doing the right thing, you'll be surprised. And that's probably why at times most individuals don't start aspiring and start really getting their sense and sensibilities until they hit their 40s. Not saying the 30s are bad, but usually in their 40s, it's like, oh, I'm finally getting it. I'm finally understanding. Oh my God, suppose I would have did some of this in my 20s. Yeah, suppose you did made some of these choices in your 20s. You'll be so much further along by the time you get to your 40s. So thank you for that, Ms. Johnson, in regards to, giving us an idea what that cash value growth is. And the main important, and I know she had that aha in her own sense when she heard the tax deferred. How would you like to be having something that is growing and accentuated, has the ability to generate some sort of resources or possibilities for you, and you ain't paying no taxes on it? That becomes a win-win. We wonder why the rich figure out how should I say it? The rich figure out with those who are wise enough who know the system, figure out how to pay as least amount in taxes as possible. I know this is not a middle class conversation. I know it's not a conversation for those who are even a little bit below middle class. The reason for tax strategies are mainly meant for those who are affluent. I hate to say that the game is rigged, but it's rigged. It is. Now, are you going to complain about the game being rigged, or are you going to take the opportunity to say, you know what? I'm going to figure out how do I get to up to where those people are at. That's why they always say, don't curse the rich. Because you curse them, you'll never be like one of us. So you shouldn't desire to stay always middling. Figure out the ways and figure out what it is that you can produce to be in that space to move up in those areas of exposure and expansion. So as Ms. Johnson kind of alluded to, but I'll take box 3 where it says interest rate guarantees, minimum interest rate guarantees. Those are the floors. It's like when you're walking on the floor with caps on gains, typically around 8 to 12%. Now, if you think about it, even 8% is a nice return when you don't have to push it. So you got to remember when we see these returns, oh, it's only 8%, oh, it's only 12%. You'd be surprised how some people have become billionaires off of 5 cents a transaction. So they only get a nickel. Mm-hmm. But they're a billionaire. How did that happen? Oh my God, they only get a nickel. You'd be surprised that those nickels will pile up. That's why I said don't despise the pennies, even though they're not really making pennies no more. But don't despise those areas where if you have enough stuff working and enough, how should I say, streams working for you, you'd be surprised. 8% in this, and then you have something else that's working is giving you 10%, and something else is only giving you 5%. Like, okay, and this thing over here is giving you 7%, and your money is working in all these different allocations. You'd be surprised why the rich are able to stay, or the wealthy and the affluent are able to stay where they're at. They figured out the strategies, have the right people, and yes, you have to pay. All this stuff is not necessarily free. Don't look for everything to be free. Sometimes it's good to make an investment and stuff. That's why, as we go back to the first box where it says permanent coverage, lifelong coverage, when premiums are kept up to date, that means you're paying. They're not just saying, oh, because you decided to get this type of policy or any whole life or term life or whatever life insurance policy. Yes, you must pay it. Very simple. You're making an investment and you're looking for a return. You're not making an investment. Say, "Oh, I'm taking care of this investment possibility to not see a return." Then you should have kept your money in your pocket. And so, Ms. Johnson, can you give us box number 4?
Premium flexibility. Accumulated cash value can be used to lower or potentially cover premiums without subtracting from your death benefit.
Ooh, so you mean to tell me if my cash value is high enough because maybe I've had it for a couple of years and I've been, say, I've averaged the middle. Say the middle of the 8 to 12% is 10%. Maybe this was one of those years when the S&P 500 or the Nasdaq 100 dipped a little bit. It was only like maybe a 6% year. So it can fluctuate. But say on average is 10%. And you may be going through a little cash flow issue. You can inform them, says, yo, take some of my cash value that's accumulated because it's been growing. Interest has been kicking on top of it as I've been paying into this respective policy. And now all of a sudden, maybe this one month, maybe I don't have to send them a bill. You don't want something to be like, oh yeah, now I don't have to pay it again. Yes, you must pay it. You shouldn't allow this thing to not have some sort of feeding. It's like our bodies. As much as that we may be working out and stuff like that, even when you're in exercise, you have to take care of your body. You have to feed it. You can't starve it. Why would you starve your insurance? And then get mad when the insurance company kicks back and is like, oh, you haven't really paid this, maybe it's going to lapse, this, and the third, maybe you may lose this coverage, and da, da, da. And now you want to start throwing your hands up and getting upset and disturbed by something that is of your own doing. That's why, as we're going through this teaching, we're recognizing IULs are not for everyone, and usually they're not offered to everyone. Because if I'm not mistaken, if my memory serves me right, when Ms. Johnson shared last week, usually to have one of these type of policies, you're looking at the floor was like the upper hundreds of dollars per month to like $1,200 or $1,500 a month. Ms. Johnson can clarify that for me or correct me if I'm wrong. But as she was sharing that data last week, that's what I said. If you missed last week, you need to go back to episode 40. So you can hear some of the interactions, so you can hear how we're building this conversation. And the reason why we're doing this, because especially for people who look like me, I desire for this information to get out. Not for some bluster or stuff like that, because once you're willing to share wisdom, you'd be surprised what you can attract and what you can keep for yourself. So was I correct, Ms. Johnson, or was I a little off about what it costs per month to have an IUL?
You are correct. The highest tier was 3,500 to 5,000. I'm trying to
Mm-hmm.
find the exact numbers, but no, you were correct.
Okay. So think about that. And usually, as we stated last week, and we're going to reiterate now, usually most individuals who have some sort of responsibility that's $900 to $1,200 per month, usually that could be part of their rent. Because if you can find, especially I'm a New Yorker, you can find a place in New York that's under $1,000, and we're not talking, and that's not like a closet, you're doing good. Or if your family or you inherited real estate and stuff like that, things of that nature, and you have access to that, be blessed. and then recognize why the rich become rich, because sometimes we do all this flipping. With flipping of certain assets is a good thing because you can be generating cash flow. But after a while, you start to recognize how the affluent always have that estate. And we may call it a mansion, we may call it, an expansion of a property or whatever we desire to call it. But they have that place where they know they can rest their head in. And then most times, eventually, especially as we go through this dynasty path for this year, when we get to that part about trust, be surprised after a while. It's like, wait a minute, some of these assets that you have should not really be in your name. And when you laugh at certain people, talking about, oh, they don't got this stuff in their name, and they don't. Becomes an old adage, own nothing but control everything. But that's when we definitely get to that trust conversation. So the paragraph. Some policies may allow the policyholder to select multiple indexes. So that means, as Ms. Johnson talked about, the S&P 500, there's the NASDAQ 100, there's the Dow 30. You have different indexes out there that people just invest in indexes. Now, as much as that people, do ETFs or get into, respective companies and own those particular stocks, of course. But see, once you become diversified, you start to recognize, yes, you probably have, your stocks of respective companies. I'm not going to call it any names because I don't want anyone to feel like we're just picking certain names or companies or whatever. You make your choices, do your research. But they'll have those particular allocations, and then they'll have their index funds, and they'll have their ETFs, and then, all the other different things. And maybe they have their money invested in some real estate, or they're, invested in as a venture capitalist into different companies, emerging markets, and all that. And it goes on and on and on and on and on. So when you see that word multiple indexes, remember, it's not just one thing. And one thing, as you being a part of the Comeback Collective Circle, or you're coming into being a part of this community, we desire for you, please do your research. We're not here just to tell you, and you just sit there and, like you're a chick. No, go back out, tell me what you found out. Because if you tell me what you found out, that means you becoming partially owning your own elevation and your own survival and your own freedom. And usually after a while, that's how the rich stay rich. As much as they may have their advisors and people and this, that, they have a handling and they're keeping an eye on. You're like, okay, let's keep an eye on these resources so we know what's happening. So policyholders can decide the percentage allocated to the fixed and index accounts. People who need permanent life insurance protection but wish to take advantage of possible cash accumulation via an equity index might use IULs as key person insurance for business owners, premium financing plans, or estate planning vehicles. That's the reason why you don't hear about IULs on a commercial. That's why you don't hear about IULs, talked about in the grander scheme. And as we said last week when we was like throwing out certain brand names, like never hear that brand name that brand never has a commercial on television. But yet they still is a high value target. You have to think about that. And those are the type of conversations that we're going to continue to decipher and generate here because, when you think about key person insurance for business owners, this reason why IUL is good because if this is key person insurance, and depending upon the value of the policy, there are times where, a business can fluctuate. With this key person insurance and they're being diligent and being fiduciary in their actions, there are times that, you may type into that cash value to help supplement what the business is doing. And then as the business getting back on its feet, okay, let's send that money back. Because we utilize what we needed so that we can be, well appointed and, just flowing. So just think about that. That's the reason why you don't necessarily hear about IULs. But it's okay. You're hearing about it here. So you can make the respective choice to figure out how you're going to continue to develop in your respective path. Any questions before we move on to the next slide? Excellent. Example of index universal life insurance. Ms. Johnson, can you read the first paragraph, please?
Let's say you selected, let's say your selected index for your IUL policy gains 6% from the beginning of June to the end of June. The 6% is multiplied by the cash value. The resulting interest is added to the cash value. Some policies calculate the index gains as the sum of the changes from the period, while other policies take advantage of the daily gains for a month.
So that means depending upon how you made the discussion or how you set it up, they'll either wait, do a whole yearly thing, every 12 months, like, oh, over the 12 months, we had an 8% rate. Okay. So now we're going to only add times 0.08 to your cash value because this is what the particular index fund that you chose made during that time frame. Or where some people can make even build up more cash value says, no, let's go month to month. The potential for that is there could be certain months that can be lower than 6%. Say the floor could be zero and 1 month is 3%, but then another month is 12%, and another month is 10%, and another month is 8%. It's a little bit better than just saying 6% flat line. So it's different options, gives you different possibilities, and as you can see in the graph, they're giving you an idea, depending upon, like, say, if you had a 50% participation and you had index at 6%, that means 3% would be going to cash value. I know sometimes they attempt to make the verbiage seem bigger or much more grandiose than what it is, but all is about, okay, if you made 50 cents and you have a 50% participation, that means they're going to add 25% to your cash value. And now you just multiply that same theory and the same thought as you move along. And now the next paragraph. No interest is credited to the cash account if the index goes down instead of up. The index's gains are credited to the policy based on a percentage rate, referred to as the participation rate. The rate is set by the insurance company and can be anywhere from 25% to more than 100%. And here's the example. If the gain is 6%, the participation rate is 50%, and the current cash value total is $10,000. So what will happen is that $300 is added to the cash value. You see how they do the formula. Your gain was 6% times 50% times the 10,000 equals $300. So that means the cash value that you would have at the end of this example is $10,300. Hopefully, I'm not speaking too fast, I'm moving too quickly. The main reason why I decided to make sure that there's an example here that you can see the actual numbers, because it makes it easier to understand. Says, oh, so this is how it works. So if my gain was 8% with the same participation rate of 50%, so that means it had been $400. Or if we had a great month or a great time frame, it was 10%, that would have been an extra $1,000. And all of these different ways and understanding how these mechanisms work so that we can become well abreast of how to work the system. Any questions, thoughts? Was this not understandable? I desire to make sure that I'm coming across clear and not just. That's why next week we'll complete. Next week will be part 3. And I see Miss Johnson has a hand raised. Go ahead, Miss Johnson.
Yeah, I was just like going through the participation rate because it seemed interesting. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
noticing that some policies offer 100% participation rate. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
offer 150% participation rate,
Mm-hmm.
which in the I don't remember, early 2020s when the world seemed like we're all walking on gold, if someone had been in this sort of policy,
Mm-hmm.
it it would have been amazingly profitable. And
Mm,
now how we've somehow dipped into the lean times, they
mm.
could then use their accumulated cash value to pay the premium to stay at the same rate. So this is
Interesting,
interesting.
huh?
This is
It's
interesting.
very
I'm complete.
interesting. No, that's great. That's a great observation, and that's one of the things that at times, which becomes such a, I hate to say this, but like why they do their best to not allow us to be in a space where financial literacy is something that's talked about when we're even younger. Because suppose people had, you know, this type of idea or were exposed to this, say, starting in middle school. Elementary school, they wouldn't really start getting it. Say, like, towards the end of middle school. Like, by the time you get to seventh, eighth grade, you know, you're getting those first financial literacy classes. You know, regardless if you have a piggy bank, which probably kids don't even know about these days, or, you know, how do you take a dollar and recognize, you know, how you break that dollar up, you know, are you a faithful person? Well, from when I'm saying faithful person, not saying anyone here is not faithful, but depending upon their spirituality, okay, do you give towards, you know, your spiritual walk? And if you do, okay, you know, how do you break up that dollar? And what is part of that dollar is for you to enjoy? And what is that dollar for you? Part of that dollar that you should be saving? And what is that dollar for your responsibilities? What is that dollar for, you know, just to have your day to day stuff? But that stuff is not really presented to us. And then by the time we become adults, now it's like, oh, you're navigating this morose and it's like, oh, this stuff is coming at me and I don't understand this and that. Third. It's like, wow, suppose we have got exposed to this stuff a little bit earlier. But I know the main reason for it. It doesn't help capitalism. Because if everyone is privy to the information that can help set them free, because capitalism only works where, you know, there is people that you have your low class, you have your middle class, you have those who are desiring to be rich, you have those who are rich, then you have your wealthy, and then you have your affluent. Capitalism works, as they say, 76% of the luxury good items here in the United States are purchased by people middle class and below. So I want you to ruminate on that statement and ruminate on something that the data has shown that 76% of what we would consider luxury goods is the dollars that are circulating on that is the reason why they desire for people to be consumers and not creators, or, you know, not figuring out how they can be their own bank and how, you know, just to be out there, just to be a spender instead of a circulator. Just a thought. Because when I found that out, that was very interesting to me. I said, wow, 76? We said 76% of the people. We said 70%, 76% of the money that is circulated towards luxury goods and items are circulated by people who are at the middle class level. That means the ones that get squeezed the most and pay the most taxes, and those below. So you just hold on to that thought and, you know, just think about that. Any questions before we move on to the last slide of the evening? Excellent. Now we ended it here because we're going to pick it up next week when we get into part 3. But here are some of the advantages and disadvantages of IUL insurance. IUL insurance policies aren't for everyone. Let me reiterate this again. IUL insurance policies aren't for everyone, but they're a viable option for people seeking permanent life insurance with a cash component that earns interest plus a death benefit. It's more expensive than term life insurance, but you get permanent coverage. Let me read that again before I even get to the death benefit part. It's more expensive than term life insurance, but you get permanent coverage. And the death benefit is paid tax free to your beneficiaries when you die. So we go back a couple of minutes earlier when Ms. Johnson had her own aha moment about the tax deferred. Oh, wait a minute. The interest, 8%, 10%, whatever the percent, all this stuff is growing tax deferred. You have this type of policy. And all of a sudden, as you're moving towards life, you're not really dipping into the cash value as much. And all of a sudden, that cash, that thing is resonating. It keeps it's just churning. It's just churning. It's like, okay, grandpa or grandma has transitioned. We loved her. She was a great person, and this, that, and that. Oh, she has this policy over here. I know the death benefit was one thing, but then it had a cash value attached to it. And now all of a sudden, oh, yeah, we got to split a check of $5 million coming from over here. I'm like, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. Yeah. His grandma or grandpa was wise. Yes, it cost them a pretty penny, as Ms. Johnson shared the data last week and reiterated that I was in the ballpark from the 900 to 1200 to upper echelon of 3,500 to $5,000 a month. That's why this is not for everyone. Don't sit there and get mad at people. Oh no, why y'all are trying to rob me? No, they're not. It's just if it's not for you, it's not for you. Then find you a nice whole life where the premiums are what they are. You pay it monthly, and then eventually as it builds cash value, and they say, oh yeah, by the way, you do have some cash value that you can borrow. And then with that whole life, you can sometimes, take a loan from yourself, which diminishes your death benefit. But if maybe you needed that funds for that particular time, and then you pay yourself back. You keep paying the premium, and then throw some on top and tell them, oh, when I took some of that death benefit, put this extra on top for that death benefit that I took out. So by the time it gets back to, when it's time for me to exit, all of a sudden that thing got replenished back. Oh, you got your full death benefit. That's how it works. That's why if I was advising anyone, I would tell her, don't get no term. What would you tell a 20-year-old? Go find you a whole life insurance policy. It's going to cost me more than good. You don't need to be spending money on all the frivolous stuff. Circulate your dollars on something that it's an asset for you. Because term life is not truly an asset unless you plan on, being a rock star and you plan on dying at 29. But if you feel like you're going to build a family, experience life, travel, things of that nature, no, you got to start thinking differently. And that's why at times these policies are not for everyone. If you're middle class and below, you're not really searching out an IUL. These are usually for entrepreneurs. These are for business owners. These are people who are moving and shaking. These are people who are making their attempts to get that piece of the higher echelon of life. If you're in the middle and you just like your 9 to 5, and you just desire to get your weekly check or bi-weekly, whatever, which is not bad. We're not making anything bad. I'm just telling you the differences so that you don't attempt to make someone wrong because they're aspiring or they're moving in a space where they have some more resources than you, and you want to think that they're just doing stuff illegal, where they're just moving a little bit smarter. They have some resources, and they're accentuating their smartness by figuring out other vehicles and other ways for their money to work and come back pregnant. You've heard us say that here over the past couple of weeks. I love pregnant money. My money should always come back to me pregnant. Not that I'm sending my money out to be, promiscuous, but please come back here pregnant. That means you're coming back with some friends. And these friends actually work because, oh, you came back pregnant. Oh, you came back with a return. Oh, you came back with some more money. What you gonna do with that? You gonna go out there and just spend it because you got no? I'm gonna send all y'all back out there and go back to work. Wait a minute. So money that you initially had came back pregnant, so you had more money. And what you did was you took all of that and sent it back out there. And then what do you think is gonna happen? The same process. Wait a minute. Okay, you invested wisely and diligently. Oh, now that whole stockpile came back pregnant again. What you gonna do with it? Send it back out. Wow. Now you start seeing this the accumulation effect of like compound interest and all that other great stuff. And when you start getting into the rule of 72 and all that other good stuff, as we're going to get into that stuff over the course of the year. You start to recognize, like, wait a minute, oh, I got to be a millionaire. So, no, you don't. You have to be disciplined. This just simply means you have to be disciplined. That's not saying that you shouldn't desire good things, have stuff of quality. No, please be wise enough to do that. Don't buy just cheap stuff just to say that you're a miser. You don't have to be Scrooge. But you can look good without having to think that you have to spend top dollar. And we're going to get into that over the course of the year about, how the rich shop, how the affluent shop. I know Miss Johnson knows what I'm about to say. We have a space called Woodbury Commons, where I hadn't noticed when there are times when me and Dr. Cheryl go to Woodbury Commons, you'd be surprised. People, some of the stores that they frequent, and you'd be like, I don't know that name, I don't know that brand, and something like that. And you go inside and you start to say, oh, this is not cheap. This is not inexpensive. But they're making investments based upon the quality of the type of life that they live in and the resources that they have access to. So when you start to expand your mindset and expand your possibility, you move out of that bubble or that box. Stop putting yourself in a box. And this last statement, the policy's value may increase due to the cash value component, and you may be able to borrow from your account. There are a number of pros and cons to consider before purchasing an IUL policy. And that's why IULs, especially for those who are rich, that means that's at beginning stage, especially the wealthy, who are in that stage where now they got the system rolling and they knowing how these resources are starting to accumulate, and forget about once they get to the affluent stage, like as I was referencing, like a Quincy Jones earlier. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. You start to recognize what are the respective choices are you making. And that's why IULs aren't for everyone. But eventually you can allow yourself to be in a space if you are really pushing yourself as an entrepreneur, business owner, things of that nature. If you are, and don't take this wrong, but if you're just a salaried employee, you're probably not looking at an IUL. But if you're an entrepreneur, an IUL will probably be something that you, once you get exposed to, is like, oh, this other person didn't tell me about these. No, they won't. Oh, you see, you have certain investments. Okay, would you like this as a possibility as part of your wealth strategy? It's a wealth strategy. All these things that we're talking about are wealth strategies. And next week, when we complete IULs, we'll really, delve into, the potential advantages and disadvantages. And that will be part 3 next week. Any questions? Any questions? To make sure if there aren't any questions, then if I do this, it's going to go blank, and it's going to bring us there. So once again, I appreciate the members of the Comeback Collective Circle for joining us here today. And we know that, other people are experiencing, other conversations, as this is on the day of this tape in March 3rd. So people are, I know some of the other people are where they're at. But, we still were going to be diligent and still keep our word to continue the process, because sometimes we can keep skipping and skipping and skipping, and that doesn't benefit us. We need to be diligent in our respective words so that our word can generate resources. So, as always, let me show the screen. We always appreciate your financial support here, which helps us to help promote and advertise, what we're doing here. And as always, the ways to give, start with, Cash App at $Gregory Clark D Min, or if you're gonna, support this platform via Venmo, that is Gregory Clark D Min. So that's the same handle without the $. And of course, if you desire to do it via Zelle or PayPal, then it's the same email address, esquire971 at gmail.com. And one other screen I desire to share, because some of you out there who are looking for AI tools, share this. Galaxy.ai is a great platform. If you're looking to do a bunch of stuff with technology, as you heard us talk tonight, in regards to how Miss Johnson was able to get the data quickly and not having to look like she had to look for the Britannica or the Funkin' Wagnalls. This is the reason why. And when you click this link with my affiliate link, not only are you helping to, with the platform, but at the same time, you start to see there's a different possibility that you can have access to a bunch of these tools where some of these people are creating some great content, regardless of videos, music, PowerPoint presentations, the like, ChatGPT, Claude, whatever. Utilize my link at galaxy.ai / REF equals Gregory. Use that link. Type that in your chat. I'd appreciate it. And by doing so, you get to save some money and start to have access to some of these great tools as well. So, with that being said, I hope you have a great week. I can't wait till next week when we're here for part 3. Yes, we're going to be here for part 3 of this conversation, the concluding conversation about IUL, so we can recognize how we can accentuate and utilize these for our benefit. So until next week, when we'll be here, the same, comeback conversations with Dr. Clarke time in the same space. You have a great week, and don't get caught up in all the hysteria, even though our gas prices are going up, because for some reason we're in another war. I don't know why, but we're in another war. So until next week, maybe we should be investing some oil stocks, maybe during this time, in construction companies. It sounds like, kind of bad, but there's people out there that's probably positioning themselves to do that. We must be aware. We must be aware. It's not about always moving with your heart. When you desire for your money to come back pregnant, some of the things that you invest in, you don't know what some of these companies are doing, but you desire to get those type of returns. I'm just saying. So, this is Dr. Gregory Clarke signing off, saying peace and nothing but love. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Have a great time. Good night to everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.